In the uplands of the Wicklow Mountains, sheep have long been the lifeblood of the land. Sheep farmers have learnt to make the best of the harsh conditions, and over centuries they've managed to create an enviable record of an exceptional and desirable product. But in the early part of the last century, if you wanted to sell your livestock, because of the lack of any transport, you needed somewhere local in the Wicklow Mountains to meet up. One of those local places that became a centre of sales was the village of Roundwood. Here, beneath the shadow of the mountains, farmers would gather in a rare moment of friendship, exchanging not only livestock, but also stories and news from across the wild, windswept hills. Nothing remains of those important market days but the memories of the older community, and from them we get a little glimpse into that heady world of the past, when monthly and sometimes weekly sales were held in Roundwood village. We begin back in the 40s and 50s, when the trading was done in what is known as the fairs, or the fair day.
Oh, I remember the fairs as well. I'm only 75, I'm not 100 or anything. But I remember the fairs when I was on the fair green in Roundwood.
Where the school is now, that was the fair green. And cattle were all sold on the fair green. Sheep never went to the fair green. They were always sold on the street.
But I used to hear the older people talking about, used to hear my father and people talking about the fairs, bringing sheep to the fairs. Like there was no penning, there was nothing like that. They just stopped them up against the wall somewhere and had to mind them there all day.
Our slot where we stood was outside of Patricia Byrne's paper shop, there beside the chapel. And beside us was Tobe Miley, and then there was Carty's a Key, and all down along the street, all the different farmers. And you could stand there all day and never be asked the price of your sheep.
There'd be lads standing around them, and they'd have walked, if you'd walked them from here to Roundwood, they'd sort of be willing to stay quiet. I presume that was some of it.
And the buyers would come around, they'd walk the whole circle around, and they'd ask my father how much we wanted for the sheep, and he'd tell them, and they'd bid him so much, and there'd be no deal made. They'd go off to the next person to do the same, and then they'd come back around in a circle again, and that'd keep going on, and they'd offer for another bit more. And eventually my father and all the other farmers, they might come down that little bit, the buyers would go up that little bit, and they'd end up slapping their hands and doing a deal.
And then if they didn't get a decent price for the sheep, they brought them back home. Then they come back up the road.
If you seen a batch of sheep coming back down that bank, your heart would sink. You'd be saying, didn't sell today.
A lot of the fair day went trying to sell, and it wouldn't be till evening until it was time for the buyers to make a decision one way or the other. Then they made their decision, and they bought and they paid for, and they started to drive their cattle then to our sheep, either out to Sally Gap or to Glencullen or out to Wicklow Gap, whichever way they were going.
I was in Roundwood Fair with my father, maybe half a dozen times only, when I was maybe 12 or 14 or around that age. And they got wiped out. The marts took over and there was no one going to the fairs.
Roundwood Fair died out, and then the first sales was in Ashford. Clark Delahunt's was running the sales opened the sales yard at that time. And they held sheep sales, and they held cattle sales, they sold pigs, they sold calves, everything.
My father started Ashford in about 1947. And Ashford actually was one of the, if not the first provincial mart in the country. We were just getting out of the fair time at the time, and there was actually quite a bit of opposition from the fair people to him setting up a mart.
And then eventually it was decided to set up a sales yard and sheep sales in Roundwood and a sheep sales in Auckland. And Tony Delahunt and his father took on the sheep sales in Auckland, and Billy Clark took on the sheep sales in Roundwood. And it went on from strength to strength after that.
We took a lease from Joe Keenan, who was the publican at the time. It was basically a field at the back of the pub, and one part of the field we built the pens, and the other part of the field then was used as a car and tractor park. The pens were they were long rows of pens with roadways in between, and the farmers stood in the roadways as they came to a particular lot of sheep, and the buyers stood at the side of the pen and bid on the sheep there and bought them. And
changed the whole scene of farming, and it went from strength to strength.
Now, a lot of people would have drove their sheep down to it, but then people that would say come a distance, say from Calgary and all, it would have been, even at that stage, people weren't driving sheep all the time on the roads because there was a few more cars, maybe, yeah.
They either walked, or some of the farmers had tractors and trailers. Some of the trailers would have been of a homemade variety, but that was the way they brought the sheep to the sale at the time, you know. Yeah.
No, they weren't made trailers. They were tied together with twines, baling twines, and pallets and all the rest of it. But look people did that, and there was lots of them there. You know, it wasn't unusual.
It was every Wednesday. It started off, I think, at a fortnight, and it went down to weekly at one stage.
There was 2 lines of pens. I forget what was there in the beginning. You know, as the sale got bigger, they put up more pens. But just go in, look at the pens. There'll be pens there that empty, and you put your sheep into a pen.
There was Harry Delahunt was Tony's father. Him and Billy Clark's father, they started it in Roundwood, yeah. Tony and Billy come up then and they took over.
Billy Clark, yes, well, Willie Clark, yeah, I do remember him. Yeah, he'd be always standing up in the centre of the pen, but there was, he was up on, say, a 4-foot height. There was a platform for him to walk from pen to pen. So then to be his secretary, or could have been a man, or could have been one of his sons, or whatever.
The relationship sometimes that's missed is the relationship with the Billy Clarks and Tony Dellans. They were critical to it because they were part of it. Now, obviously, they put on the facilities, they made money in commission, but they were more than that. I mean, they could get abuse one day, they could give as good as they get, and they could take as much, and like they were critical to it all, but they were something that wasn't there in the marts. You see, they kept it, and they did their best to make sure everyone was an honest broker.
Yes, Billy Clark, yeah, he was all our friend. Willie, as we called him, Willie. Billy, you called him Billy, we called him Willie always, Willie Clark.
I mean, all auctioneers have their their own way of doing things, you know. He was a great character, and he enjoyed the crack, and he liked doing a deal, and he was very straight, and he always, that was really important to him. I think that came from his father as well.
If my sheep was in the first pen, I'd be just there, and I'd say they're mine and tell them because you'd have to tell them what to wear, where the hoggets, or where the 4-year-old Joes, or where the ram lambs or weather lambs, or you know, whatever. He
was standing up and he'd say, now we're at pen number, he'd usually never say these are belong to such a one. He'd say, we're now at pen number 5 here, we're now at pen number such a... Oh my God, you couldn't understand the word they were saying. It's a gift, that auctioneering. It's really a gift.
On a wet day, slippy, cold, you know, and like I'd often worry about Dad getting down off it because like there was no health and safety, and some of the boards were rotting in bits and pieces, so it was tricky. But but that's all part of the fun, isn't it?
On a windy day, it could be tricky enough.
If you were a clerk, you stood beside the auctioneer, and you stood on his, like if he's heading up the row, you stood below him to allow him to make progress when he wanted to make progress. Well, that was with Dad. And if Dad wasn't happy, he'd shunt you along, you know, if you're in the wrong spot. But
the pens would be bursting they'd be creaking when the big sheep came in. The better sheep, they would be creaking, you know. But they got them in and they did the job, and we great memories of it now. It was great.
Roundwood sales was always considered a good sale. Roundwood got a lot of very good Cheviot sheep. It was always regarded as a good place for a buyer to come to Roundwood. They would be sure of getting good, well-bred Cheviot sheep that was down off of the hills.
And you'd have some of the older guys, and they were the best fellas, you know, the real characters used to arrive in, and like in the back of a van, and they'd have 5 or 6 ewes in it, you know, and they might go back and get more afterwards. But the other thing I noticed was the way the farmers used to help each other. Like an older farmer that mightn't be able, the younger guys would go and collect their sheep, bring them down and help them, and bring them home if they weren't sold, you know. So there was a real community aspect to it as well.
People used to come from all over the country to buy these sheep. Like the Wicklow sheep were very, very well thought of, and we had buyers from all over Ireland. And particularly the men from the north used to come down. There was 5 or 6 big dealers from the north.
I particularly remember the northern Irish buyers arriving down. And they weren't coming down for the good of their health. They were coming down to buy the best sheep in the country. And the local farmers are really, really proud of that.
In the latter days, when transport became more available, they used to send down these huge 3-deck sheep lorries, you know, and they would take 600 sheep.
There was a man called the Pigeon Carney, and there was George Horner, there was Sean Chaseman, Victor Shields, and there was 5 North men used to stay here for years. We done bed and breakfast at the time, and they do Blessintown as of a Tuesday, and they'd buy some sheep in Blessintown to come on and stay here that night, and they'd go to Roundwood, and between them, the 5 of them, they'd buy a lorry load of sheep, and those sheep would all have to be loaded that evening and that night. They go on all night loading sheep on treble-decker lorries to go to the north.
I remember when we go up on the very early morning of a sale or a show day, and there was a northern reg in the car park. My father would breathe a little bit easier, and I think the farmers themselves would be happier, you know. But there was a lot of really good fellas from the north, and there was a great relationship over kind of a 20-25 year period there.
He'd start off and he'd say, I have a pen here of 15 hogget ewes. What am I bid? And you might say £5 and I'd say $5.10. You know, like any auction.
I used to love when the farmers, so you'd have a pen, 20 ewes, and they'd climb in on top of them. And farmers just have the sheep farmers have a way of doing it. They'd manhandle the ewes out of the way, and they'd go for their specific one. They'd check their teeth, they'd check their elders, you know. And I was always wondering, like, what exactly are they looking for here? But you didn't want to ask, you know, because we were, greenhorns, I suppose. But and then they might check a ewe, and then they'd bid, you know.
The buyers they do have different styles of bidding, all right. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Some nod, some, you know, do something, whatever, or point a finger, or touch their hat or whatever, and then.
Oh yes, and the cap would go up, and the eyebrow would go up, and they had a hat then, which would be rare in them times, that flicked the hat.
Some guys would they'd lean over the pens like that, and they just raise their thumb, and that's a bid. Or they'd be sitting back against the far pens, and they bid that way, you know. or it would be just like a raise of an eyebrow. And I think my dad, he knew them all, you know, most of them anyway, and really well. He didn't know what their signals were, you know.
I remember one time in the early 70s, lambs were very bad. They were only making £3 and £4 and £5, and a bad lamb, Billy Clark was finding it hard to get them started, or Tony Delahan maybe at the time. There was one particular fellow who used to stick up one finger for £1 to start them. And I remember a neighbour behind me smoking his pipe and he had a hand stick, and he said, if that so-and-so sticks up that finger again, I'll cut it off.
You'd have neighbours buying sheep and they wouldn't want each other knowing, you know, so they kept everything really quiet. And I couldn't understand that coming from where we were from, but then when you see it happening and you get to know these people, you understand it, you know.
It didn't matter to me whether they nodded or winked, so long as the money. All I'd be thinking about is if the bidding stopped at £6, was I happy with £6, or I'd either have to sell them or say no. And if I said no, he might give them another shake and see, or he might not too, because the auctioneer would be like the rest of us, he'd be human, and if he thought you were getting enough and wouldn't sell them, he wouldn't bother his arse looking for any more.
But I do know one day I was selling sheep there one day and I wasn't getting what I wanted, and I went up the yard, got the lorry, drove down through the party of people, dropped the ramp down, and as soon as I did that, the people who were there to buy the sheep came up with the right price, because they knew I wasn't going to feck around. If he didn't want them, I was gone. I wasn't going to hang around.
Well, there was lots of chat. It was all chatting, like, do you know what I mean? It was all chatting. And then they wouldn't settle on a price, and then they'd be going to drive them home, and then somebody would say, well, now I'll give you another £1 or £2, or that's all it was then, like.
Or a deal being done after, and the auctioneer had to be told, because I'm sure it didn't happen all the time, but it was the right way to do it, and most people did, you know. But it was an education. I always said going to a mart was an education in the art of business.
Because I remember my father talking about one day in Roundwood in the late 70s or early 80s. It was the first day a yo made £100, and he talked about it for months after, and he said that he remembered the time in the economic war when it took 100 yos at £1 a piece to make £100, and he never thought he'd see the day that one yo would make £100.
Once you sold them, you went, if you were old enough, you went into the pub.
They used to joke about Ashford, say. The office was Caprani's, the bar across the road, and before that it was Sinnett's. You go to Roundwood, the office was Keenan's bar, which is the coach house.
I remember that. They had their office set up inside in the pub in Keenan's bar, and of course everyone was out, you know, for a wet day, so obviously there was plenty of muck went in.
Of a wet day, there'd be a tub outside in the yard, you'd rinse your boots in it or try and rinse them. But there would be a lot of mud drawn in, but at that time it was such an occasion, no one minded.
The pub was destroyed. I remember John Keenan was not happy with the farmers dragging sheep shite in, not happy at all, and they used to make a mess of the place, you know, and that's just sheep farmers. I mean, they're in it all day long, and when it's wet, it's wet.
It was a fairly rough and ready pub in those days, and particularly if it was a wet day, they'd nearly want to wash the place out after the farmers coming in with their wellies. And most farmers went straight from the sales yard straight into the pub, and they were there for the night. They're lucky they might get a sandwich if they were lucky, but...
So then you knew you go to the mart, bring your sheep, bring your cattle, you had an auctioneer, you had a sale, you did the business, then you went in, had a drink or whatever, and chatted about things, and informed each other, you know. See, you didn't have any online. So what did you do? I spread lime. I did this. I used this drench. I used that drench. I found it better. You know, whatever. And you should, like, it was a way of, it was almost like discussion groups. Like we have discussion groups now, which are good, you know. But that was like your discussion group, and it was every week. For some people, it went every week, you know, because Roundwood was seasonal, so it would start maybe in July and finish in November, December, and then it wasn't. So you knew that was sheep season, sales season, where the others were all year round. But
Dad was so at home up in Roundwood. He just loved the characters and the people, the area. He just loved it all, you know. He really felt very, very at home up there, you know. So
there was humour. That's one definite thing, and wisecracks.
And I remember a neighbour was selling lambs or sheep on that one particular day, and Billy Clark told him he was getting enough for them, and he still wouldn't sell them. But when they went into the pub and this neighbour got a few drinks and Billy Clark got a few drinks, they started to argue over the sheep. And eventually the neighbour told Billy Clark he wasn't fit to sell rabbit skins. And Billy Clark laughed for months and months after that. We were told he wasn't fit to sell rabbit skins.
There was a terrific atmosphere, and then my uncle and my grandfather, they had sheep. So as a kid, I went down with them first, and then as we grew a bit older, we used to get time off school, and we'd all go in as kids, because the amount of people that was in the actual sales yard, and then there was all these different people had their own stands selling stuff, you know, farm clothing and toys and, you know, these extras that you get.
Cyril Good was a vet, and he had this big orange, you know, the Mercedes van, the big one with the straight front. They're iconic at this stage if you got them. And he had the door open, and he was selling, and you could buy your drenches and your injections there. And he did that for years, and he used to do Ashford, and he used to Roundwood.
Oh yes, he used to sell the vet stuff, the penicillin and all was sold at the gate, that's right.
You'd have other guys going around with maybe reps for sheds, for mineral buckets, for feed companies.
Yeah, but various marking fluids and, you know, related, sheep related.
You know, as a kid, I never seen that before, so it was like something very unusual and exciting, and you could see things maybe that you would like to have, if you get me, yeah.
Do you know where Centre is in Roundwood now? The younger people, like us, you know what I mean, it was great to be able to go into, it was Mason's shop at that time. It was great to be able to go in and get what you called a 3-penny ice cream. Or a 6-penny one. You were really rich if you got a 6-penny one, you know. Jesus, gas.
I remember, Lord of mercy on the man, he's a few years dead now, Jack Couch. I remember being at an IFA meeting one night, and there was some talk about the sheep sales. And I remember Jack Couch saying, like, commenting on that the quality of the sheep that was sold in Roundwood was very high, and that we really should have a show and you know, where the best of the sheep would be put together and show them off, you know, to improve. And it did, it was a great idea.
There was, you know, it wasn't straightforward at the time. People were that little bit sceptical of it, and how would you run a show? They never had seen a show run, and where would you get the prize money? who would sponsor this and who would sponsor that, and who was going to put in this effort. And it took then people, go-ahead people like Jack Roach became chairman of the show committee, and he had great drive and vigour in him, and he got everyone around him, and we got a team around him, and I think we probably have one of the best, between Roundwood and Auctioneer, we two best show committees I'd say in Ireland of sheep.
The farmers, they like the idea of competition, and there was a great competition between them for the best pen of ewes and best pen of lambs, and there was also two wool classes in cooperation with the shows.
The week of the show was a really busy week. The committee would be out putting up new pens, and people like Bill Cunningham, Tommy Webster, and there was a brilliant committee, and they all pulled together to get the place ready for the show day.
Between ourselves and them, well, them mainly, we'd build the pens. And I used to love that. We weren't probably great use, but we loved it. But I remember they used to pass around these bottles of kind of TK red lemonade, and there'd be stuff, I thought it was just water, and my brother, who was a bit of a messer, his younger brother, picked it up one time and opened a bottle and took a massive big swig of what turned out to be poaching, and the best of Roundwood poaching, so it'd blind you on a good day. But yeah, that's the type of stuff that would go on.
I remember going up on a show day. First of all, we'd always get up really early, like 6 o'clock in the morning. We'd be up, and Mum would do this massive breakfast. We always had porridge and then a fry, which is unusual. But anyway, we always had porridge and then a fry, and then we'd head up to Roundwood. We'd get to Roundwood about 6:30, and Dad would always peer down over the hill coming down the road, and you'd see this white, just all the sheep, and the yard would be half full at 6:30 in the morning.
Well, sure, from early morning, you had everyone was rushing to get in from early morning, and in the beginning there was no pens allocated. You picked your own pen, so you rushed to get into the best position. But then as time goes along, they took entries and you allocated a number for a pen, and you could come in later in the day. But it was the highlight of the year.
The way the show worked was that there would be I forget now, but we'll just say 4 sets of judges, and they'd have 3 classes each to judge. So they would start judging, I forget now, we'll say about 10 o'clock in the morning.
There was 2 or 3 judges for every class, and you had to, when the judges would go up and down the pens and they'd pick out so many pens of sheep, then they'd have to let them out in the alleyway, and it was up to the committee then to have the spectators cleared out of the alleyways while the judging was going on. That was announced over the microphone that the judging was starting, and the alleyways had to be cleared, and there was no one allowed in, only the judges and their helpers. And it was the helpers' job, the show committee's helpers, as we were called, to let out the sheep, let them run down, back up, run down, back up, put them in the pen, let out the next pen, do the same. The judges made their decision then, and that was it. So every committee member had a job.
You would know the judges, yes. There'd be usually 3 judges per class, and they'd go through whatever thing, and then there'd be scrutineers. They would check that the O's were right in order, and that was the way things were done.
We used to I'd bring a couple of judges. Like, there was one, Paddy Moore, we had a wool council in those days, and he would come down and be a judge. He was a well-respected civil servant, basically, head of the wool council, yeah. And we'd go in the morning and look around the fleeces. There was just simply a prize for one type, but in Wicklow you have the lowland, grassy land type Cheviot, and you have the hairy fella, yeah. So we had to make 2 classes, yeah, and we would give prizes, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 quid, I forget what it was, yeah, for the prize winners, yeah. But we would get somebody respectable, not myself of course, to be the judge, yeah. So I'd keep the motor of the car running, ready to get out quick. But I know they're always good-hearted and good-spirited, yeah. And there were loads and loads of people, because every house and every farmer up there had, you know, a couple of hundred sheep at least.
So the whole morning would be taken up by filling up the pens, then the judging would take place, and then we would give out the rosette. The judges would send the results into we had this little caravan in the yard in Keenan's pub, and the results would come in there. We had a sound system set up on show day. The results would come in there, we'd announce the winners, and we'd go out and put the rosettes on the pens, pin them onto the pens.
Yeah, oh yes, all the different classes, and those who were prize winners had the rosettes placed.
If you had your sheep in whatever class and they won it, you would be hoping that they'd make it would draw attention to them, and everyone would want to buy the ones.
Well, say it started off, it was 10 in a pen, and then it went to 20. But it meant if you was entering them in the show, in a class in the show, well, you'd put the best 10 or the best 20 you had or was selling together. So you had lines of terrific good sheep.
Oh yeah, we'd show and sell, yeah. Oh, this prepping, getting sheep organised that they all 20 look the same. And well, you're trying to get everything matching, same size, same look. You had Cheviots, and then you would have the Suffolk Crosses, so the 2 main things, and then you'd have 5 fat yo classes in the show day.
And this is what the buyer wanted. There wouldn't be one bad one on it. You know, there would be top class sheep, and they obviously wanted them.
There was great rivalry between the people, you know, and the fact that if somebody got, in those days there were punts, if they got a punt more than the neighbour, that was really what made their day for them, you know.
When it started first, the 3 and 4 year old shows was the big class. I won that 4 times.
It was great to win, and the crack and the whole lot that went with it, but yeah, you'd get a good price then. So you would.
And Edward won a lot of prizes in Roundwood, and he produced great sheep himself and Des, his brother.
It was always a great day out, yes. Yeah, and especially if you were showing sheep, you were terribly interested to know how you were going to get on and who was beating you and all the rest of it. And you'd be judging them unofficially.
He was very competitive. He had the will to win.
I never showed sheep in the show in it. I always considered that our sheep wasn't good enough to be showed in it. I have to be honest about it. I always thought that the sheep wasn't good enough for to go into a show. You know, because the standard was high, and it was for to put sheep into the show and around, you needed a good sheep in it. There was no 2 ways about that.
Well, I wasn't that competitive, so I didn't get involved in. We fed them the best we could, and we had decent sheep, but we never had a sheep to compete with Edward or maybe Fishers or some of them at the time.
Now everyone went to the show to have a look in at the show and sale, like. Yeah, it was lovely.
Oh yes, you'd go to see who's prize winning, and you know.
That was very common with people. They go to the show and people always like to see what was on show, you know, and like to see the prices, and that was very, very common.
The morning time was the judging, and then in the afternoon was the sales. On a show day, Dad would be selling the ewes, and his brother Pat would be selling the lambs usually, and one of us would be with either of them.
On the show day, yeah, you'd have more than one auctioneer. But Pat used to run the corn company and Clark Oil. And Pat was a busy man, but yet he'd turn up and help Dad, which I really admired, actually.
So we had a little office set up in the caravan, and that was run by Marie Miley, who was Dad's secretary at the time, and there was Nancy O'Brien and my mum, and they had a brilliant setup. They'd right crack with all the farmers, and the farmers would come in and out and pay for their sheep, and they'd have everything off to a T. And on a normal sales day, they'd have a little corner in Keenan's pub, but on show day, they had the caravan. They had soup and tea and sandwiches going all day long, and the committee would be coming in and out, and then the sheets would be coming in and out with the results of the show, and then the sales then as well. And there'd be huge amounts of money coming and going, but it was electric. The atmosphere was fantastic.
I remember one day talking to the auctioneer a week or two after the show sale, and he said he had 24 men from the north of Ireland bought sheep in Roundwood the show day.
The activity, the tractors, the farmers, the smells and the sounds and everything else, it was great.
Oh my God, a massive amount of people. Oh, a massive amount of people. People with no sheep or probably no interest in sheep went because it was the show and sale, do you know what I mean? And then of course the ones that got first, then the big prices was paid for them. And
the whole village used to come to it, the whole town used to come to it. It was packed out, like families would come down, the schools, when the schools emptied out, they would all come down. There was businessmen from all over, politicians. It was a great occasion, and I think it's very sorely missed, I think, but it wasn't just about selling sheep, it was much, much more than that. There would also be a little market there, and people selling coats and rubber boots and all sorts of agricultural stuff, and it was a big, big day, and great to be a part of it.
People looked forward to it, and the social occasion and the aftermath of it, that night in Keenan's giving out the prizes. People came especially for the night's entertainment. People came from all, business people would come up, people maybe would have sponsored a class or gave prize money.
And in the evening, we had a presentation of prizes in Keenan's pub, which was a great affair, and the cups were duly filled and passed around, and everybody had a sip, and there was all kinds of everythings in the cups, but we survived. So
the rosettes is the piece that everyone sees, or the cup. And God, you get drunk just taking a sip from every cup that go around. You wouldn't be able to stand up if you were to. It was crazy stuff, But it was then you'd be almost insulting somebody if you didn't take it from their cup. It was a different time.
Well, they asked us to sponsor, so we sponsored the fleeces, yeah. And we used to have great days out up there, because the prize giving at night in the pub was always a great event to attend anyway, yeah. And we had plenty of lads like the Kinlans from Loughdon up there, the Foxes, I suppose, from Callery, the Suttons, yeah.
They gave good prizes too in it. Yeah, you could, if you won, they used to get sponsorship from some of the big firms, that give stuff. Now it'd be more or less what would be useful on a farm, but it was always useful to the farmer, yeah.
Everyone was looking at the social occasion, and everyone was enjoying it. And everyone, even, you could bargain hard all day outside, but once you went in there, it was the highlight of the year.
The presentation was very well attended, and all the farmers' wives would be all there, and yeah.
Yeah, I always went on the show day. The show night, I should say, not the show day. Now.
Oh yes, you'd go to see who's prize winning, and
Well, all the presentation of prizes, and we'd have a drink, and we'd meet. It was a great night.
like Bridie and Willie Cunningham's wife, Ellie Cunningham, and a lot of the women, they enjoyed it.
Yeah, I remember Dad going, it was always a big thing, and all the farmers getting drunk on the show night.
Yeah, well, that time, you see, you had to clear your pub at a certain time, and you only had 10 minutes drinking up time, and then, as you know yourself, 10 minutes in a pub is like, it could be 10 hours, or it could be, 2 hours. So, yeah, there was always a bit of a rush at night then to get the place clear.
And Tim Cronin coming in, taking the keys off all the drunks, and you're driving those people home, not will you? You are. I remember I quizzing Tim about it, he said, and all the time he said, nobody ever lost their licence, nobody ever had crashes.
He did, yeah, but he was trying to look after, yeah, so, but that way it worked.
And then the drunks the following morning had to come in and get the keys off the cops.
People didn't have a lot of money, and then the fact that they had money in their pocket, they started celebrating, like, yourself, one drink became 2 or 3, and so he was there trying to keep everyone safe, really.
Started to come in that there was foot and mountains in mainland Britain, and it was in mainland Britain, how soon is it going to get? And then it was the Cooley Peninsula, the Mourne Mountains across that strait, Carlingford Lough. Like that was the flashpoint.
I remember the fear when it arrived in the north, and the fear when it got as far as the Cooleys, and there were sheep brought in from England, and they arrived onto farms in the country, and it wasn't very fair to anybody. There was some dealers done that, but there was a great fear in 2001 that it would spread and you could lose your whole stock.
I remember the mat in through the gate, and now the mats, yourself. I mean, how many people walked on the same mat? I mean, it made no sense, but anyway.
It was a very worrying time for my dad, and for all the sheep farmers, because like some of them had running the risk of losing their entire flocks, so yeah, it was a worrying time for farmers. But I think most people remember was the restrictions on travel, the restrictions in the airport and bits and pieces.
We did have a black and white television, didn't have it too long, and fuzzy HTV, but seeing what was going on in England of cows being burnt, that's the one thing you brought up something which I'd nearly forgotten about, but that's one of the things I see, them rounding them up and burning them out of fear.
And then when the case came to Ireland, that was identified, we were all having a cup of coffee with the news on, and well, that was serious. Everybody thought we were doomed.
Oh God, munching Valium, I thought this year we were going to go broke, because if we relied totally on exporting our lambs to France. Oh, I remember, Joe Walsh coming on the radio, yeah. Oh yeah, and I'll never forget, as long as I live, I'll never forget that.
It was frightening. I mean, to see on television the piles of cattle and sheep being burnt, pits dug and being being shot and burnt.
The foot and mouth ended the show because it was in a field there in the middle of the village, and it was only pens like in a field, and it wasn't concrete, it couldn't be washed.
They cancelled the show in 2001. Everything was cancelled because the whole country closed down thing, and then Plough Match got cancelled on the 10th of September. We were in Northern Ireland at the time at a farm, seeing where special needs kids worked, and then September 11th hit.
And it virtually ended the likes of the Roundwood shows sales. timber penning. It did effectively. It was one or two, but timber penning, you know, it couldn't be tolerated because it could hold viruses and bacteria, whatever. So it was tough.
I won't forget. Yeah, no, it's one of those things. And then in 2002, we had a show, and the day of the show, Billy got a letter from the department saying he was running a legal show, but he went on regardless.
There was a rule brought in that sales couldn't be run if they hadn't, steel penning, and they had to have the department certainly wanted concrete, and they wanted washing facilities, and they wanted toilets on site, and all that sort of thing. So it obviously was going to cost too much expenditure to get it up to standard. So the sale never got going on. It was ran maybe 1 or 2 years after.
2003 came along. We get students here from UCD for lambing duty. One of them rang me up. Her name was Amy Murray, and I asked normal question, what does your dad do? Oh, he works for the Department of Agriculture. I said, oh, what's his name? She said, Aidan Murray. I said, the most hated man by all sheep farmers, was he's the man who brought sheep tagging in. That's him. I said, fine, no problems. So Amy came down and our dad came down, and we went out to the yard and we showed him around what we do. And I said, listen, we have a little problem in Roundwood, you know what it's all about. I said, come directly to me, do not negotiate with the local SVI, Senior Veterinary Inspector, come directly to me. So I had his number and we negotiated, myself and John Nolan, Stony Pass, and Billy went up, and we met the department and we negotiated a deal, and we had a show and sale in 2003 and 2004, and that was the last time we had a sale.
Dad had passed away at that stage in 2004. We did have one more show in 2004, which was difficult without him, but we got through it with the help of the committee. But unfortunately, after that, despite several efforts, we were never able to come up with an alternative arrangement in terms of running the sale and the show. And we did want to keep on, even just to do the show, just for the tradition and all of that. But the department wouldn't grant us a license, and we were upset about that, because we felt that it was a great tradition that was dying effectively at that time, But it was unfortunate. We just couldn't satisfy them, and we couldn't make it happen, unfortunately. And that was the last show in 2004, I think.
The sale's gone. It's not the same. There's not the same companionship now. And you've went on in more recent times. You have moved on now to the selling online.
Nowadays, they're all done online. A lot of people just drop their sheep at the mart and gone, and go home and they see them sold on the phone, because we're all so busy. And those days in 60s, 70s, 80s, it was a social outlet for people.
But I missed Roundwood, because I used to go to the sale every week in the end of my days, go to the sale every week. Even if I hadn't sheep, I'd still go over and have a couple of pints, and you'd meet someone. And
they're building houses now on the where we had our sales, and that's progress. We recognise that, but from a farmer's perspective, a lot of these guys are remote. They're out in the country areas. Now, they're looked after by their neighbours, but if you don't have a reason to come into the village, you don't have a purpose, you'll stay at home.
Yeah, it was more than just selling sheep. But it's gone, and
everyone fell in with it. Yes, it was a great day. Yeah, they'd be planning for months at it, and yes, it'll be the talk then for a while.
To us, I think everything that we valued is kind of gone. Do you know what I mean? It's all now, that's all his now.
It was a very important part of our lives, and an awful lot of the great characters have passed away, including Dad and Pat Clark and Frank Nuttall and Bill Cunningham and Tommy Webster, like just absolute. We thought they were legends, you know. Anyway, and it's great to see them at least being recognised and remembered in something like this, you know. And we're delighted to be involved in it. It was a big part of our lives, you know.
Great. It's a lovely village. It really is a lovely village, and it's changed, like so many other places with development, and there's a lot of new people in the area. Now that's probably a good thing in some ways, but the community, when you lose something like a mart, they drift away a little bit, and certainly some of the older people in the agricultural side of things probably don't see it as the same place, which is a pity.